Hello, I'm Miss Kilburn Bond. This video is going to help you think about how you can revise for descriptive writing. So the learning objectives of the video are first of all to explore a planning strategy that will help you structure your descriptive writing, and that will be a brilliant way in which you can revise, just spending 5 minutes looking at a question and getting used to having a quick planning strategy that will mean that your writing will be much stronger as a result of it. We're also going to revise techniques that will help you write cohesively, expressively and descriptively. So that means that your ideas will form a really nice overall picture, so the cohesiveness, almost like the ideas are sort of sticking together and are fluently structured. It's writing expressively, that you can get your ideas across in a way that's interesting and engaging and lively and imaginative for your reader. And obviously descriptively, we'll look first of all at making sure you're clear about the difference between descriptive and narrative writing. And finally, but importantly, we're going to bust the myth that you can't revise for a creative writing question, because it's not true. And if you want to do really well in this part of your GCSE, and of course you do because it's 25% of your overall mark, then you do need to spend some time preparing and rehearsing just like you would for any other subject. So what you can see there are two example AQA exam questions from paper 1 section B, which is question 5. So if you look at the first one on the left hand side, your local library is running a creative writing competition. The best entries will be published in a booklet of creative writing. Either write a description of a mysterious place as suggested by this picture, or write a story about an event that cannot be explained. And then on the right hand side, your school or college is asking students to contribute some creative writing for its website. Either write a story about a magical world as suggested by this picture, or describe a place you think is beautiful. If you look at the bottom, this is worth 40 marks, 24 of those marks for your content and organisation. So that's for the ideas and the detail that you put into your writing and how you organise it through your paragraphing and the development of your ideas. And then 16 marks will be for your technical accuracy. So spelling, punctuation, grammar, paragraphing, vocabulary, all of those things are going to be really important for you to do well on this question. But what I want to focus on first is just making sure we're clear about the difference between a description and a narration, writing a story. So if we look at that first paper on the left-hand side, write a description of a mysterious place as suggested by this picture. A description is different to a story. A story, a narrative, is going to involve characters, it's going to involve plot, there's going to be some kind of movement as to what happens to tell that story. A description doesn't tell a story. A description simply describes a setting, a character, a scene. It creates and evokes an atmosphere, but it absolutely doesn't need to have characters or a sense of a movement from beginning to end. It is just a moment in time that you are using your descriptive powers to capture. Now in the exam, we don't know what's going to come up. We don't know whether the description is going to be based on a picture or whether the description will not be linked to the picture. So if we look in the left hand side, that first exam paper, write a description of a mysterious place as suggested by this picture, you are using the picture to inspire a description of a similar place, or how that photograph makes you think about a similar setting. The paper on the right hand side, actually the picture is used to prompt the narrative, the story. Instead, for the description, it just simply gives you a statement. Describe a place you think is beautiful, a command. Describe a place you think is beautiful, and you can then have the freedom to choose anywhere that you might want to describe. So you need to be prepared for both. You can't really rely on going into the exam thinking I always do the description or I always do the narrative, because we don't know exactly how the paper is going to work. It could be that there are 2 narratives on the paper and there isn't even a description one. The description question could be based on a photograph, or it might not be. So you need to be really versatile and not get stuck into thinking that you're just going to prepare for one type of question. So what you can see now on the screen is a writer's toolbox. So instead of having spanners and screwdrivers inside, we can see paper, pencils, pens. Now why we're talking about a writer's toolbox is because you are going to need to go into the exam prepared for the sorts of techniques that professional writers are using to make their descriptions powerful. So when we talk about techniques, what we're thinking about are some of the techniques that we can see on the screen there. And this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some of the techniques that you will have been learning in class and that you might be able to use when describing a setting or a scene. So we've got a simile, metaphor, hyperbole, personification, pathetic fallacy, onomatopoeia, oxymoron, and emotive language. And on the right there you can see some examples. If you need to pause the video to remind yourself at this point, then you've got an example of each of those techniques. And as I've said, there are more that you no doubt know and are using, but there's just to remind you of that writer's toolbox. Really important when you are bringing to life a description. And then this picture is reminding us that for this part of the exam, you want to be thinking about sensory description. So that means relying on the 5 senses. So touch, sight, taste, smell, sound. All of those senses are how our brain experiences the world, and so when you are writing you need to be using all of those 5 senses as well. It's very easy to fall into the trap of only describing what you see and ignoring all of those other ways in which we experience the world around us. So practicing using different senses in your descriptions is going to be really powerful for you, and there's plenty of information online about different words, a wide range of vocabulary that you can learn to enable you to talk about different types of smells and sound and touch, etc. Now this is my favourite image of the thesaurus. So a thesaurus, a book that you would use to find synonyms, to find words that have similar meanings to a word that you already know. So here we've got the gasping human looking up at the huge dinosaur, and then the dinosaur saying inhale, pant, puff, respire, synonyms that could replace gasp. Now why I'm showing you that picture is because I hope bringing a bit of fun to it will help you remember the importance of vocabulary to get as many of those 40 marks as you can. So you need to be constantly looking for ways in which you can develop and improve and extend your own vocabulary. Don't settle for the word said or the word good or the word big, all those classic easy words that we pull on all the time. Don't settle for them. Try and show the examiner that you're thinking, and show your reader that you're thinking about how to make your language more interesting, more precise and more ambitious. And just like if you were going to buy some paint for your room, if you use this idea of a kind of paint palette, you can see, for example, if you were to describe the colour of something in your description, try to avoid just going for a straightforward blue or yellow or white. Think about how you can be so much more ambitious in how you use your vocabulary to describe a colour, for example. And finally, we can't forget that you've got a spag mark here that's really significant. You cannot do really well in this descriptive writing piece if you're not thinking about things like your punctuation. And what the examiner is wanting to see is that you know more than just how to use a full stop and a capital letter. So you need to be really certain that you're clear about how to use commas correctly, but it would also help extend your writing and extend your mark if you're really confident about when you might want to use a colon or a semicolon, for example, a question mark, an exclamation mark, a dash over a hyphen, parenthesis, the brackets, etc. So if you're unclear, then make sure that you do some work around getting yourself really confident about how to use a range of punctuation so you're not always just using those basic full stops. This photograph here of somebody holding their mobile phone is how we're going to practice planning, because all the research says that the students who plan their descriptive writing do better when they actually come to write that piece. So what we've got here then is a photograph of a housing estate with obviously a thunder and lightning storm happening above it, and it looks like it's night time. So the strategy that I'm going to give you for planning, let's say this was the photograph, the picture that you were given in an exam and you were asked to write a description based on this, I'm going to ask you to think about how you can think about taking 5 photographs to come up with a really successful plan. So when you're looking at any image, and even if you're given one of the questions that doesn't have an image and it just says describe a place that you think is beautiful, for example, you can still do this by thinking of what that place would look like as if it was a photograph. So ask yourself some key questions. What would you zoom in on? What's worth zooming in on with your camera? Who or what might get an extreme close-up shot? and when might you pan around with that camera and use a long shot to change the focus or change the mood. So thinking about having a camera and how you would, things that you're doing in your life, probably with your phone all the time, using your fingers to kind of zoom in, zoom out, moving the camera around to get different people or different settings in focus. Thinking about that as a way of planning your descriptive writing is going to really help you. So let's have a look at what that might look like in an exam. You've only got 5 minutes of planning time really. So here are my 5 photographs that I think I might take if I was going to describe this scene. And you'll see I've presented them as if they're a flowchart, because as I'm planning I'm thinking, oh, I think that idea would work nicely first, and then it would flow on with the arrow to this idea, and then this one would seem to make sense next. So I would start with a wide angle shot of the street, and I think at the beginning of my description I would probably have the thunderstorm in the distance. The rumble of thunder wouldn't be too close. Then I'd zoom in on one of the houses, so to kind of make the description more precise, and I would to add some interest, make that particular house suddenly lit up by lightning. Then an extreme close-up where I, as the narrator, would be able to see inside the house and perhaps focus on a frightened child hiding under their covers. Then I might pan round because in a different house a dog starts growling, barking. And finally I would return to a wide angle shot again of the street, but at that point the thunderstorm might be fading. And you'll see that that word return is highlighted, and that's because this is a really clever tip that you can use to quickly get some marks for structure in the exam by returning back to your first focus. So we started with a wide angle shot of the street, we're ending with a wide angle shot of the street. Can really help show the examiner that you're able to do something clever with structure, because I'm not just copying the first paragraph, that wouldn't be great writing, but what I'm doing is copying the focus, that wide angle shot, but I'm showing that there's been a shift, a movement in terms of atmosphere. At the beginning, the thunderstorm was coming towards us, it was a rumble in the distance. At the end, the rain and the thunder's fading and it's moved over the house and is going away from us. Now that's a good plan, but we can make our plan even more helpful and more ambitious. So what you can see on the screen now are the same 5 paragraph ideas, if you like, the same flow diagram. But what I'm doing now is around each of those ideas, I'm adding some more detail about how I could use the 5 senses, about how perhaps I could use one of those writer's toolbox techniques, perhaps a simile or a metaphor, to try and add more interest. Now, with practice, this is something that you can quickly get used to sort of scribbling out in that 5-minute planning time. So when I start with that wide angle shot of the street, you can see I've added onto my plan, oh, I'm going to talk about a rumble, a distant growl. So already we've got some figurative language there describing the idea of the thunder as being like a growl. The menacing tingly feeling, a foreshadowing, so the tingly feeling using the sense of touch. I might describe in that first paragraph the fresh smell of rain, the sound of the rain pounding on the car roof, more sensory imagery. Then when I move on to zoom in on the house, in my plan I'm going to remind myself that I could talk about a strobe light, like being at a nightclub, so I can bring in a simile there. I'm thinking I could use taste at this point because I often feel that there's a metallic taste in the air just before or during a thunderstorm. And then obviously sound's an obvious one, an explosion of thunder, a bang, a bomb, a blitz, followed by an eerie silence. So there I'm already thinking about putting some alliteration in, but also using perhaps a semantic field about warfare perhaps as I go into my description of that thunderstorm. Then with the extreme close-up and the frightened child, I'm thinking of having a silhouette of a teddy, because that links with this sort of imagery of an innocent child, that as the lightning flashes, it becomes a sort of monstrous reflection on the door of that child's bedroom or the wall. And then the child themselves shivering under the duvet, the whimpering sound of their fears. So you can see lots of atmosphere being built through the description. And then in my 4th paragraph, I've got the barking of the neighbour's dog as I panned round to that focus area. But to add more detail to that, I think I'm going to talk about the frantic barking of the dog being in unison with the reverberating sound of the thunder, and talk about how that's a discordant sound, so not a very easy sound to listen to. It's a cacophony of noise. So look there at how I'm trying to think about how I can be ambitious with my vocabulary. The lights inside the house, I'm going to explain how they switch on as I imagine people are sort of getting up to respond to the dog's barking. And I'm thinking that I could do something with a metaphor or simile, comparing it to being like a doll's house and making the people inside seem quite little and vulnerable. And then in my final paragraph, where I'm returning to the wide angle, in my plan I've started thinking about the retreating thunder rolling away. I'm going to talk about the lightning changing to a flickering, so I could compare that to a light where the electricity's not working quite properly and the light's flashing on and off perhaps, or a battery going out on something. And then the rain fading to a pitter-patter, so some nice alliteration and onomatopoeia there. And then I think I'd like to end with something to do with the puddles on the road, maybe doing something metaphorical about how they're holding the memory of the storm. So hopefully now you can see how that plan is going to help me be able to write something that's really clearly structured and is jam-packed with that vocabulary that we've talked about, the sensory imagery and the figurative language, the writer's toolkit. But I said that one of the points of this video was to bust the myth that you can't revise for descriptive writing. And I also want you to realise that yes, it's brilliant to sit down for 45 minutes and actually practice doing a whole piece of writing, but descriptive writing can also be revised in just 5 or 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is take you through a whole series of slides that you can use for your revision. Now, I would suggest that you listen to the video through once and then you go back and you pop in and out of it whenever you want to then spend 5-10 minutes or the full 45 minutes revising. And what you can do is then simply pause the video screen, and with that screen up in front of you, you'll be able to use it as a prompt for your writing. So all of the slides now are going to take the same pattern. So you'll see an image, and then you'll see the full 45-minute question at the top. Write a description suggested by this picture. In all of these, I've given you a picture, even though, as I've already explained, in the exam the description might not be inspired by a picture, but in terms of revising and practicing, then having a picture is a really good thing to do. If in the exam you didn't have a picture to inspire a description and it just told you the kind of scene you need to describe, then as I've already said, you can apply the same planning approach by imagining what that picture would look like in your mind. Now, for each slide, I've also added a mini writing challenge, and this is where I want you to think about how you become brilliant at revising for this question. Because yes, fantastic if you sit down and you do your 5-minute plan and you do your 45-minute piece of writing, but in just 5-10 minutes, so regularly a couple of times a week, you could set yourself a mini writing challenge where rather than writing the whole answer, you just simply, for this one, write a paragraph that includes a metaphor or some personification. So you look at that image, you might have a go at the 5-minute plan, so you've got some ideas about how you turn it into a full answer, but then you don't write the full answer. You simply write one paragraph, really challenging yourself to make sure you can use a metaphor, you can use personification for good impact. So in this next picture, the mini writing challenge, write a paragraph in which none of the sentences begin with the or they. That makes for really boring, dull descriptive writing. So that's banned, you're not allowed to use those. Instead, I'm going to ask you to have a go at trying to make sure that at least one sentence starts with a simile and one sentence starts with an adverb. The mini writing challenge here, write a paragraph that doesn't include the words December, Christmas, red, green and white. However, you still must include colours in your description, so hopefully you can see how that's really pushing you to use that extended vocabulary. So you could write a description suggested by this picture, or just have a go at the mini writing challenge. Write 2 paragraphs about this same scene, so inspired by the picture, but one of the paragraphs you're going to write from the perspective of a narrator who's on the beach watching this family rock pooling, and the other paragraph you're going to write as if you're a creature in the rock pool. So trying to think in a very abstract way and doing something a little bit unusual can be a really nice way of practicing your writing skills. So the fairground picture, if you don't decide to write your full description, why don't you try and write one paragraph in which you are only allowed to talk about the senses of smell and sound. Take sight out of it because that's the one we all automatically go to, and just try and describe using smell and sound and see what you come up with. So Children's Sports Day here, your mini writing challenge, write 2 paragraphs about the same scene. One of them, you're going to use your vocabulary and your techniques to create a happy, exciting atmosphere around this school sports day. In the second paragraph that you have a go at writing, I want you to totally transform the atmosphere, and this time try and create tension and a sense of foreboding that something bad, unpleasant is actually going to happen. Your mini writing challenge for the waterfall picture then is to write a paragraph that starts with a prepositional phrase. So for example, at the end of the lane stood an old house. And I also want you to not include the words water or trees. In this snowman picture then, your mini writing challenge, write 1 paragraph in which you only concentrate on the senses of touch and sound. In this busy town scene, if you don't decide to do the full 45-minute, write a description suggested by this picture. Your mini writing challenge is to write 2 paragraphs describing a busy shopping centre, one from the perspective of a child and another from the perspective of an older person. So really thinking about how the voice of the writer and the perspective from which you approach that description is going to transform the language that you might use and the imagery that you're going to create. So you could spend 45 minutes writing a description suggested by this picture of the deer, by the river in the snow, or just simply think of 3 similes that could be used if you were going to write that full description of this scene. In this next picture of the exam hall, your mini writing challenge is to write 1 paragraph in which you use a semicolon accurately. Your mini writing challenge here, write 1 paragraph in which you only concentrate on the sense of sight. No sound is allowed. So you can do that in 5-10 minutes, see how you get on. Write a description suggested by this picture. 45 minutes really trying to bring that setting to life, or write 1 paragraph in which you include the use of personification. I think you could have a lot of fun using plenty of personification to try and create an atmosphere around that abandoned house. So a climate protest picture here. You could just write a description suggested by the picture, or your challenge is to write 2 paragraphs based on the image, but in one write from the perspective of someone who's part of the protest, in the other write from the perspective of someone who's intimidated by the protest. So it's the same sort of playing with the idea of language and how you use your vocabulary to show those different perspectives. So a classic sledging scene here. If you choose not to describe it in 45 minutes, give this mini writing challenge a go. Write 2 paragraphs, creating a strong sense of coherency through creating a link between the 2. So let me just explain that a bit more. In theory, if you're a really strong writer, I should be able to pick up your descriptive writing, chop up all the paragraphs with a pair of scissors, throw them all over the floor, pick them up and put them back together. It'd be really easy to do that because your paragraphs would show links between them. So you've got to find a way where, as you come to the end of one paragraph, what is it you're going to pick up from the end of that paragraph that then you put into the beginning of your next paragraph as a little link. So you could almost thread between each of the paragraphs to create something that follows that theme through. So this is a really powerful image to use for your descriptive writing. If you decide to write for the 45 minutes, brilliant, or write your 5-minute plan. But what about this mini writing challenge too? Write 1 paragraph in which you avoid any sentences that begin with the or he, and also can you include at least 1 metaphor in that same paragraph. So inside maybe a club or a concert venue, writing challenge for this one is to write 1 paragraph in which you use ellipsis, so the 3 dots, correctly, and also can you put an oxymoron into that description. So a sunny theme for this one. Either write a description suggested by this picture, or for your mini writing challenge, 1 paragraph in which you only concentrate on the senses of touch and sound. So removing sight from you again to get you to really think about how to be more sensory in how you approach your writing. So from summer to November, firework display, write a description suggested by this picture, or just give the mini writing challenge a go. Write 1 paragraph in which you include onomatopoeia and alliteration. You're sticking with a more autumnal wintry theme, write a description suggested by this picture, or write just one paragraph, but in that paragraph you need to use pathetic fallacy to add to the atmosphere. And then from rain in the city to the beach in the sunshine, write a description suggested by this picture in 45 minutes, or your mini writing challenge. So 10 minutes, write one paragraph in which you describe this as a happy scene, and then another paragraph where you change the mood to one of misery. So you've got exactly the same picture, but you're doing two entirely different things with it. So it looks like we're inside an aquarium now. For your mini writing challenge, write one paragraph in which you cannot use the word blue, and in which you use one simple sentence to create impact. So sentence variety is not just about how the sentence starts, but about the sentence length too. So children's birthday party now, your mini writing challenge, write a paragraph that includes just a very short piece of dialogue to support your description. In descriptive writing, you're not going to be having characters having conversations, but you could, where it brings your description to life, you might have one very short quote, something that maybe one person shouts out across a particular environment, if you feel that it adds something to the atmosphere of your description. And then the last one here, write a description suggested by this picture. I think this is a really challenging picture, but one that you could really do something amazing with. So give this one a go if you can. But if you just decide to do the mini writing challenge, write only the first and the last paragraph. So you can miss out the bit in the middle. But what I really want you to try and do is to create a cyclical structure where you start and end with a similar motif, but something must have changed. So I explained that when I was giving you the example of the thunderstorm. See if you can now recreate that idea using this picture as your prompt. And that brings us to the end of the video. So hopefully you now feel that we've explored a planning strategy to help you structure descriptive writing. So that's using your camera and those perhaps 5 photographs that you decide to take, zooming in, panning around, zooming out, and then that tip of how you can start and end with the same angle, but you make something shift and change. We've revised techniques that will help you write cohesively, expressively and descriptively. So we've talked about lots of different things that the examiner would be looking for, and that's going to make your reader enjoy your description more. So the writer's toolkit, thinking about vocabulary, thinking about sensory imagery. And hopefully you now no longer believe that you can go into that descriptive writing paper without having revised, because you've got a whole host there of little mini revision activities that you can practice, of longer activities that you could have a go at. And what you should also be able to see is that you could very easily find your own photo prompts, things that you find interesting, or just look around you. You don't even need a photograph, just look around you at a particular scene wherever you find yourself and think about some of those same strategies that you could just quickly do in 5 minutes, 10 minutes if you don't have that full 45 minutes to practice. I hope that's been helpful. Thanks for listening.